continued. The next day the circuit rider rode away on his horse. Father set up his cloak upon the shelf to be mended later, and life went on again as usual. But now the children began to talk about when Uncle Edmund would come, for Uncle Edmund always came with the pigeons in the fall. He made his annual visit when the shooting was at its best, for he was an eager if not a very skillful sportsman. Mrs. Woodlawn sighed. "No one can say that I am not a devoted sister," she said, "but the prospect of a visit from Edmund always fills me with alarm. My house is turned upside down, my children behave like wild things, there is nothing but noise and confusion." I can't believe it. I wonder if her mom was maybe screaming and then... But I don't think this happens in Caddie's family. "She seems to be a nice family." Let's continue. "But Ma," cried Tom. "Don't Ma me, child," said Mrs. Woodlawn calmly. "But Mother," persisted Tom, defending his hero, "Uncle Edmund knows the most tricks." "And jokes," cried Caddie. "'Member when he put the hairbrush in Caddie's bed?" shouted Warren. "And the time he put a frog in a covered dish on the supper table, and when Mrs. Conroy lifted the cover?" "That is enough, Tom," said his mother. "We remember Uncle Edmund's tricks very well, and I've no doubt we'll soon see more of them." But she looked forward to her younger brother's coming just the same, and when the pigeons came and there was no Uncle Edmund, everyone felt surprised and concerned. One night when they went to bed, the sky was clear and the woods were still. But when they awoke in the crisp autumn morning, the air was full of the noise of the wings, and the flocks of birds flew like clouds across the sun. The passenger pigeons were on their way south. They filled the trees and the woods. They came down in the fields and gardens, feeding on whatever seeds and grains they could find. The last birds kept flying over those which were feeding in front, in order to come at new ground, so that the flock seemed to roll along like a great moving cloud. "The pigeons have come!" shouted the little Woodlawns. "The pigeons have come!" Even Baby Joe waved his arms and shouted. Tom and Warren armed themselves with sticks went out with the hired men, but for once Caddie stayed indoors. She liked hunting as well as the boys, but this was too easy. This was not hunting, it was kind of wholesale slaughter. Now, even if it's animals, we won't wholesale slaughter them. No, we can't eat them. We can't grow them if we wholesale slaughter them. But I mean, it's fun. So in this case, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. She knew that the Indians and the white men too caught the birds in the nets and sent them to thousands into the markets. She knew that wherever the beautiful gray birds went, they were harassed and driven away or killed. Something of sadness filled her young heart, as if she knew they were doomed to face. The pigeons, like the Indians, were fighting a losing battle with the white man. Well, we did lose a lot of our animals. I mean, the truth is the truth. But I mean, we can eat them, but I don't think wholesale slaughter is the way to go. But John Woodlawn was a glutton, as some. But John Woodlawn was a glutton, as some of his neighbors were. He said to Tom and the hired man, "There is not much grain left in the fields now. Drive the birds off and keep them from doing harm as well as you can. But don't kill more than we can eat. There is moderation in all things." Really? Interesting. And so that night there was pigeon pie for supper. But the Woodlawn farm, no more birds were killed than could be eaten at the Woodlawn farm. After supper, Robert Ireton, probably good policy. I mean, you can eat them, but just, keep some for later. After supper, Robert Ireton, strumming his banjo out by the barn, sang the song that everybody had on the lips at this time of the year. "When I can shoot my rifle clear at pigeons in the sky, I'll bid farewell to pork and beans and live on pigeon pie." The three children huddled around him on the chilly ground, hummed or sang with him, and all about them in the darkness was the rustle and stir of wings. A few days later, the passenger pigeons had appeared as suddenly as they had come. they had taken up their perilous journey toward the south. It was as if they had ever passed by, except that the woods were stripped of seeds and acorns and dried berries, and some folks still had cold pigeon pie in their kitchens or dead birds on their truck heaps. Then, after the pigeons were all gone, came a letter from Uncle Edmund announcing his arrival on the next steamer. The little steamer, as everyone called it, came up the Numany River once a week as far as Donaville. Its arrival was a great event, for all the letters from the East, all the news from the great world, most of the visitors and strangers and supplies came up the river on the little steamer. The Woodlawn children begged to be allowed to go and meet Uncle Edmund. "Certainly we can't take all of you," said Mrs. Woodlawn calmly. "I shall let Clara and Tom go, because they are the eldest." Tom looked at Caddie and Warren with a superior smile. "Too bad you little children have to stay at home," he said. "But we can't take all of you." "All right for you, Tom," said Caddie, talking like that. She and Warren withdrew. They crossed to the barnyard and climbed to the haymow. Nero went with them to the bottom of the ladder. He was quick to sense trouble, then he saw it, and his tail wagged in mournful sympathy. Caddie and Warren buried themselves in the hay and talked things over. When father or mother had made a decision, the Woodlawn children accepted it as final. That's questionable. I've always questioned my mother's and father's decisions. This, I think, is a good idea, especially considering I think we should question our parents' decisions. There was a very little teasing for favors in the large pioneer family, but not to meet Uncle Edmund was unthinkable. "It's just because they haven't room for us in the wagon," said Caddie at last. "But if we walked—" "Sure," said Warren, his face brightening. "And let's not tell them we're walking either. Let's save it for a surprise. Or maybe we could take one of the horses," suggested Caddie. "Pete's the fastest," said Warren. "Better take Betsy. Pete always runs for the low shed behind the barn and scrapes us off." "Sure," said Warren. "We'll take Betsy." When the time came to meet the steamer, Clara and Tom, in their Sunday clothes, climbed into the wagon and behind Mr. and Mrs. Woodlawn. Tom was a little sorry for Caddie and Warren, but he couldn't resist a smirk of satisfaction. Only, strangely enough, Caddie and Warren did not seem as depressed over being left behind as they should have been. They stood beside the wagon, grinning like two Cheshire cats. Eddie and little Minnie stood with them, looking properly wistful. The moment the wagon started, Caddie and Warren made a bee-line for the barn to get old Betsy and ride across the fields through the woods. That's page 33.